What is it about the Graham Potter and Chelsea kind of dynamic that just didn't work? There's so many things we've spoken about during this whole podcast since he's been there for the last 6 months. But it was a terrible match, wasn't it, the two of them?
It feels like it's a terrible match now that it's gone wrong to the level that it has. I do wonder if it's kind of terrible planning that's made this go wrong, because you've given him a 5-year deal, you've called it a project this whole time and hired this young coach, and you've given up 7 months in. And the expectations on Potter are always going to be sky high, but there is obviously the need for a bedding in period for both him, his staff, and the new players that he's been given. It's just, it looked like too much all at once, really. Changing managers, changing squad, changing staff, changing ownership. There's no stability at Chelsea. And really, with that, you need the strongest character possible to just ride that storm. And Potter's not the strongest character. He's not someone who's experienced top level. He's not someone who's experienced that level of playing staff before, or that kind of money being thrown at it. So it was kind of set up to fail. That's not to say he's blameless. He's definitely got a few things wrong at Chelsea. I'm sure we'll talk about them in a moment. But yeah, it just wasn't an ideal matchup, really, when you consider the circumstances around it. And that's not new news just because he's been sacked this weekend or because they lost this weekend. We've been saying that for a long time, haven't we?
Yeah, well, so it sounds like you're putting a majority of the blame squarely at Todd Bowley and the board. Is it fair to say, like, the decision lay with them to recruit him? So does that where the blame should lie from now on?
I think so with this one, because they showed their naivety in the summer when you looked at their transfer recruitment that Bowley was in charge of in the summer of the place, and not much has changed since then. Now they've brought in these co-sporting directors who will look to make the next decisions for Chelsea, and that is the right move. That is how that should be played out. But I can't get behind the logic of building this project all at once and expecting it all to work out perfectly. No club ever does that. You look at a club like Man City, for example, they do refresh their squad, but it's only ever bit by bit, really. They look at a targeted area, they improve that area, they play for a season, they bed them in. I'm sure we'll talk about that later on when we come to the City game, but it's a slow process, and Chelsea have tried to do too much too fast and then been surprised when it's not worked, and Potter's the casualty of that, sadly.
It's mad to see them down in 11th, isn't it? I think that's the optics of them being in the bottom half of the table that really kind of makes this look like it's now or never to kind of make this change, isn't it? They're only above Palace in the table, and Palace are in danger, let's not forget. So Chelsea are the worst of the teams that aren't struggling against relegation, which is embarrassing in some ways, isn't it? They've won 38.7% of the games that Graham Potter's been in charge for. Their second sacking of the season. It's meant to be a new Chelsea, Dave, but it's not really, is it? We've talked about the board, but what did Potter get wrong, do you think?
Oh, it's the whole circumstances around it are laughable, really, with what's been going on. In terms of what he's got wrong, I think in his last game, you look at the selection. I think his selection's been a little bit all over the place. He's been tinkering and changing a lot of the lineups he's been fielding. Reece James at centre back is a strange one for me. And then you're trying to shoehorn Cucurella into that back three as well, which is another strange decision when you've got obviously a couple of centre-backs on the bench who are more than worthy, and Badiashile, who's actually been really impressive when he's played for Chelsea so far. I just think, the selections have been very odd. And then playing Ruben Loftus-Cheek at right wing-back ahead of your best, probably arguably your best player in Reece James. And what actually stood out for me in this last game against Villa is how effective Chilwell was in that left wing back role, particularly in the first half. But then they offered nothing going down the right. Everything was going down that left hand side, and Chilwell was their biggest threat, basically, who looked the most likely to score a goal. And it just really baffles me when you've got a talent like Reece James and you're playing and you're shoehorning him into a centre back position. I just think that's criminal, really. And that some of these decisions, it does seem like it's backfired. I agree with Myles. I think that the way the ownership has dealt with the whole situation has been laughable. I think if you look even 2 or 3 weeks back, and obviously when the international break was in place, there was a lot of positive spin being placed on that they were still backing Graham Potter. They're saying it's a long-term project. I do actually feel as though, because there have been a couple of managers that have become available since then, I think the factor that Conte's been sacked, I think that's changed a lot. I don't know whether Chelsea could stomach the idea of Spurs getting Nagelsmann. I think that has played a factor as well. And I think they've just pulled the trigger. And I think we've seen it coming, haven't we? We've just been wondering when it's going to happen. But it's just bizarre considering what's come out from the club. They're saying they're going to back Graham Potter. The only thing is, whoever they bring in now, what are they going to achieve? So they're in 11th place. There's only so much a manager can come in now and do. Yes, they're going to get time with the squad. They're going to get a bit of time to get an idea across, their own ideas. But at the end of the day, that Graham Potter probably, I can't see him potentially them doing any worse than 11th this season. I don't think they would have gone down any further than what they were. What was the worst, that could happen if they just stayed with him until the end of the season, cut their losses at the end of the season? It's not good enough because whoever comes in now is going to have reservations about taking the job at this point in the season, whether they can really have an impact straight away.
That's true.
Yeah, I think Miles was saying the Champions League's on the horizon. I think that's really played a part, hasn't it?
Can you see Potter beating Real Madrid? Absolutely not. And that's the only thing Chelsea have got to play for now. So they have to give that their all in whatever way that looks like. There are managers on the market right now that will do better in the Champions League than Potter would have if they can act quickly. It's difficult because I feel like they were backing Potter and backing the project for as long as possible. But now the optics look okay because actually, if they do manage to get Nagelsmann in, that's a really positive PR spin because it's still a young project manager. And it's like, okay, well, we're not cutting that idea off and going for a Mourinho type figure. We're still going to back a young coach to develop, but there was a better young coach available, someone who's got a 100% record in the Champions League this season. So it seems to me that they've just waited for. I don't think Potter would be gone if Nagelsmann was still at Bayern right now. I think they probably would have waited. He probably would have had more of the season, but there was the option.
It's mad.
And Dave's right.
It's mad, isn't it? I was going to say that if Tuchel never got sacked from Chelsea, he probably wouldn't be at Bayern right now. Therefore, Nagelsmann wouldn't even be available. So it's a strange chain of events, isn't it?
And Tuchel should still be at Chelsea. I think that's apparent to everyone. He would manage this squad far better than Potter would have been able to. The things that Dave says he got wrong, they're not new Potter things. Potter used to tinker a lot at Brighton as well and change the system. He's been hampered with injuries at Chelsea to a degree, but I don't know what people expected of him in terms of a regular starting 11 when all of a sudden he's got a squad full of players that cost a small fortune. You can't pick the same 11 every week because you're going to end up with someone like, I don't know, Raheem Sterling, who you just spent 60 million on, sat on the bench furious. Noni Madueke has gone into Chelsea, and all right, he's young, his time will come, but he must have been fuming watching at the weekend and not starting that game because, like Dave said, the right-hand side where he'd operate, they offered nothing down there. There's a whole squad that he's got to manage all of a sudden, and he's just not used to that. It's an interesting time for them now. They've got to make a decision. There's talk that they might let Bruno stay to the end of the season because Nagelsmann doesn't want to take a job till the summer. That would be mental to me. That, to me, says you should have kept Potter.
There's some noise around Pochettino as well, isn't there?
Yeah, another one that would be bizarre. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think if you were going to do that, you may as well have kept Potter. The only reason to get rid of Potter now is if you can bring someone in who can basically use the league season, what's left of it, as a pre-season, evaluate what he likes about that squad, who he needs to move on in the summer, and then go from there. We said the same thing about Spurs, but Chelsea are in that position even more so with the Champions League still to play for. It's a weird situation there now.